Yes. Good. Thank you. I'm so sorry about that, people. And so we'll start again. So what we've got here is Richard Trevithick. And Richard Trevithick was someone who really uh, invented some of the early steam trains, some of the first ones. So this was a question I got from two schools in Wales, in Barry. And this was from Calcott and St Helens primary schools in Barry. And they asked, when was the first trains invented? Well, I'm going to talk about steam trains, and I'm going to talk about what Richard Trevithick did. So, Richard Trevithick. So let's talk about what trains were like before the rail steam trains. So what we've got here is a picture of a wagon way. We call this a wagon way, and you can see what the difference is between a train we have today and a train in the past. And as you can see, horses. They were pulled by horses, and these trains didn't go between cities and towns like they do today. They went from coal mines, where people would pull up the coal from the earth and take them down perhaps to a river or a canal, and then on boat the coal would go a long distance, perhaps to London from the northeast of England. So what happened is these trains were not very long, and the railways were not very long. But over 200 years ago, Britain was at war with France. And what happened is feeding the horses got really expensive. So people thought, well, how can we make using trains? How can we make using trains cheaper? So they thought of, what about steam engines? So 200 years ago, I'm going to show you a picture. Trevithick invented this. And this was called the Coalbrookdale Locomotive. And it was built in 1802. So that's 218 years ago. It's a very long time ago. And then he invented this to pull goods and stuff, and coal and iron. It was an ironworks. But we don't know that this train actually worked. But 2 years later was the first ever steam train in 1804, and that was along a tramway in Merthyr Tydfil in Wales, and he pulled the train along. The locomotive pulled the train along, and this was the first ever steam train 216 years ago. Very, very, very long time ago. But Trevithick wanted to sell his locomotives to people. So he took his to London. Oh, I've got the wrong caption there. Sorry about that. I've got the wrong caption there. Let's take that off. So this is what Trevithick did in London, and this is in Euston. So if anybody knows Euston, it's North London, and he created what he called a circus, the steam circus, so people could pay some money to ride around on the train. And this was very popular, and people enjoyed it. And it ran for about a couple of months, and the train he used was a new type of train. It was called Catch Me Who Can. And people enjoyed that and had a really good time. And it was the first sort of proper steam train that many people could see. Unfortunately, he had to take the trains off. He had to stop the trains because, well, it caused the rails to break. So, but this is really important because people can see what steam trains can do. So that's the first steam train. So I hope you enjoyed that. The next one is a really interesting technical question. Can trains get a flat tyre? So that's from the schools in Barry as well, Calcott and St Helens schools. Thank you for your questions. They were really great. So can trains get a flat tyre? Well, trains don't have tyres like cars do. You know, you pump a tyre up in a car and it inflates. Well, trains don't have tyres like that, puffed up with air, but they have metal wheels, and you can see an image of a metal wheel here. Perfectly circular. Well, we'd hope it was perfectly circular, but trains did have, or in the past mainly, trains did have a metal ring round the outside, and we call that the tyre. And as you can see, I've got the arrows on the screen and they're pointing to the tyre. And this would be put on because you can then replace it every now and again, because as trains went on more journeys, they went further, it might get a bit worn down. It might get a bit worn down, so you might need to replace it. So as a train did more work, they might actually replace the tyre. So there we go. That's an easy, simple question. And so look every time you look at a steam train, look out for the tyre around the outside. So the next question I've had, the next subject I'm going to talk about is, and I should say, modern trains don't really have tyres much these days, and if at all, I'm not sure, but they don't have tyres. They're becoming not the norm, or they become not the norm. So I had a question from Ziad, who asked questions for. Hello, Ziad. Thank you for your question. And he asked about the London and Birmingham Railway. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the London Birmingham Railway and its creation in a bit, but I've got this interesting image, and this is the London to Birmingham Railway in construction 1836. So the London to Birmingham Railway was one of the biggest engineering projects since the pyramids. Well, that's what people said. It was a huge construction of a railway. And as you can see, what they've done is they've cut a big cut in the earth, and they're going to lay a railway right through there. But I want to talk about what happened to the people who lived there when they built a railway. So when people built a railway, they built it usually through where people lived. And a lot of places they built it through was where people who were very poor lived, and they didn't have a lot of money, and they lived in really poor conditions. So think about your house and think about how many people live in your house. Now take one room of that house, and in the Victorian period, some people lived with whole families in just one room, and they lived there, and they were really poor and they couldn't afford more. But the railways wanted to build through this land because people were poor and the land was not expensive to buy. So when they built the railway, they just knocked down these buildings where the people lived and went through. So these poor people had no homes, and then they had to go and live somewhere else. So this area in Camden, from the picture, was really full of poor people who had to move when the railway was built. But the problem was that people thought this would be a good thing, because where poor people live were not liked by other people. They were not liked by, shall we say, richer people, and they thought that by clearing it would be good, it would improve people's lives. But actually the people who lived in poverty and lived in the poor conditions actually moved elsewhere into even more cramped conditions, even worse housing. And I've got a picture of how some Victorian families lived, and as you can see, there are lots of people in rooms, very tightly packed. So the railway construction was not good for these people, because they were moved on and they lived in poorer conditions. So that's about sort of what happened when people built railways. Of course, for a lot of people, when railways were built, it gave them plenty of opportunities to go wonderful places, interesting places, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And people enjoyed travelling on the railway to these new places, and a lot of people who didn't have much money could go long distances for the first time. But when they were building it, a lot of people were unhappy about what was being built on the railway. About railway building. But on to another question, another one from Colcott and St Helens Primary School in Barry. So their question was really interesting. Has a train ever caught fire? And yes, trains have caught fire in the past. Not so much these days. I don't think there's a recent case of a train catching fire. And I want to talk about why that happens. So we've got a train there. Who can tell me what the train is? The locomotive? Sorry? It's the Flying Scotsman. Anybody who said Flying Scotsman, a big round of applause for you. Now, I put some arrows on the picture because out the top of a steam train comes smoke from steam from the boiler. So when you heat water up, there's a lot of water in steam trains. When you heat water up, it evaporates and becomes steam. But also out the top comes smoke from the fire at the front of this, in the cab of the steam train. And what happens is, as you see on the right, there is actually some what we call sparks and embers. And in many steam trains in the early years and a bit after, sparks would fly up out of the top of the steam train, as you can see there. They would fly out the top of the steam train and they might float back and hit the train. Oh no! And what that might do is lead to the train catching fire, the wagons catching fire. And sometimes this did happen. And I want to tell you about one time this happened in Scotland. So here we go. We've got another picture. Now, as you can see from that picture, there's a big ball of smoke and fire and flame. This happened in 1867. What happened is a train full of goods. So goods are not passengers. So they're shoes, coal, fluids, boxes, things for the stuff we need to live. A goods train was steaming along, and then one of these sparks went up the top of the train and hit a wagon, and it went up on flames, up in fire. Oh no! What happened next is that another train came behind very slowly. It saw it and bumped into the back of this train. And as you can see from this, these are all the people running away from the train. Well, no one was hurt. This was an accident where nobody was hurt. But everybody had to run out of the train, and they stood, as you can see on the embankments up here, if I move my mouse, on the embankments. They were up on the embankments, and they had to wait some time for some help as the train burned. So trains did go on fire quite a lot, and they were carrying a lot of stuff sometimes that might go on fire very easily, like wood or paraffin or oil or stuff like that. So it did happen. Happily, it doesn't happen so much now and hasn't happened for years like this. So we have to be happy about that. Another thing is sometimes trains would spray their sparks out all over the farmland next to it. So trains would go through farms and the farmland, and farmers used to complain to the railway companies that I've got fields that are on fire because of your trains, and the railways had to pay them money what we call compensation. So it's money when somebody's got some damage by another person, the other person pays them money. So the next question, so let me see, what we got? The next question is about numbers. So I had a question from H. Why do trains have numbers? Well, these two trains that are on the screen now are perhaps one of them is really, really, really famous. So if anybody, we've had the Flying Scotsman. Can anybody tell me what the train on the left is? Anybody who said Mallard, good point. Point to you. Well done, well done, well done. So the one on the right is in Montreal. It's in Canada, and that is called Dominion of Canada, and it's the same type of trains. So what that means is the wheels are the same, the body is the same or similar, very, very similar, and they have a similar design. We call it a design. But can anybody see the difference with Dominion of Canada? Can you see the bell on the top? That was given to Dominion of Canada specially. But the trains are very, 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 very similar. They are the same. So if you didn't have numbers on them and no names, so if you didn't have names, you wouldn't know which one was which, probably. So the numbers help us know which train is which and help us understand. Say if you have one that was broken and one that was not, and they had no numbers, you wouldn't know which one you needed to fix. So the numbers help us understand which train is which. And this is really important for railways because railways had thousands upon thousands upon thousands of locomotives of different types. But some types of train were built lots and lots of times. So if you had 100 of the same type of train, you'd need a way to work out which one was which. So that's why we have numbers, amongst other reasons. And I hope you like seeing Mallard. I love seeing Mallard. Mallard is one of my favourite trains. Of course, world record holder for steam trains, and a lovely train. It's in the National Railway Museum, and I recommend everybody go and see it. Also, if you want to go and see Dominion of Canada, you'll have to go to Montreal to the Canadian National Railway Museum. But I didn't go when I was in Montreal, so I'm a bit sad about that. So the next question I had, so I promised Ziad that I would answer his question about why was the London to Birmingham Railway formed. So this is the Liverpool to Manchester Railway. So that was one of the first railways, and the first railway to really go between big cities in Britain. This is Chat Moss, between the cities, and as you can see, you've got old steam train going along there, and it's a nice picture, isn't it? But this is really important for why other railways were built. So early on, this railway, the Liverpool to Manchester, was really successful. People went, wow, what a fantastic railway. It's doing everything we want. It's making a lot of money. It's moving goods really quickly. And so people saw that and thought, wow, let's build more railways. Let's build them so we can move goods between one place and another. So a lot of business people thought, why don't we have a railway that went between London and Liverpool and Manchester? Why don't we have a really long railway? So there were two projects that built that really long line, and I'm going to show you a picture. This is Burke Hampstead railway station. As you can see, the railway station is just a little house. So the railway station is here. Can you see? Oh, went back, wrong way. Went back here. So there's the station. I'm circling it now. It's really basic, isn't it? It's not really like a station we have today. But they thought, well, there are canals. You can see a canal on the right, but they're really slow to move your goods between two places. And they were really expensive to send your goods by, your freight and your materials by boats. So they thought, why don't we build a railway? And that's why the London to Birmingham was formed, and the Great Grand Junction also was formed. And then those lines were opened in the late 1830s, and by the early 1840s, you could get a train all the way from London to Birmingham, and then on from Birmingham to the Liverpool and Manchester. So it's about people's sort of businesses. It's about moving things quickly. But also, and I should say, when people started thinking about railways, they thought they won't carry many passengers. They won't carry people like you or me. But when they actually opened them, lots of people wanted to go on the train, and it really surprised them. Well, we like going on trains, don't we? And it was a really new experience for people going on the train. So it's an interesting thing, that. So finally, I want to talk about something else. And I want to talk about women and the railways, because this is really important. This is a picture from a man with a funny surname, Augustus Leopold, and his surname was Egg. And this is a painting called The Travelling Companions from 1862. Now, I'm going to tell you a secret. This isn't actually Britain. This is in France. The picture is in France. But they look as they're having a relaxed time, don't they? They're having a nice time, and it's a nice place behind them that they're travelling, perhaps to or from. So before the railways, the railways changed the way that women moved. So before the railways, women didn't really move much around. They could not move very far on their own. So if you wanted to go somewhere, if you were a woman and you wanted to go somewhere, you probably, you didn't probably. And trains were really expensive, but also the society at the time said that, you had to have a man travel with you. So you couldn't move on your own. You had to have a man go with you. And they had to fit in with what the men wanted. But when we think about what the railways did was open up opportunities for women to travel on their own. And travel got cheaper, so people could move further. But also, it was safer, and women could travel on their own. And they travelled more and more and more. And by the late 19th century and early 20th century, they were travelling. Well, firstly, they travelled for leisure purposes, for going to fun things, to meet friends. And then later on, more and more women started to work. And so what happens is the railways are really important in allowing women to move independently on their own. But towards the end of the 19th century, a lot of men didn't really like this, and they said, "Oh, well, we have to stop women," or they tried ways to stop women moving on their own. It didn't work. So it's really important that we remember that the railways actually were really important in allowing women their mobility. We call it mobility when we move ourselves, to move themselves. And I think that's an important thing move themselves. It opened up opportunities for women to travel, and that's really important. So that's pretty much it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed everything I've told you, and hopefully we'll do another Q&A soon. This has been really enjoyable, and hello to everybody. Hello to my two friends, my niece, Evie, and hola a mi amiga Nora en España. And I hope that you enjoy it and that you tune into the next one. So, goodbye.